Vanessa Rhodes was 42 years old. She had warm brown eyes that had learned to hide a deep pain, and a figure that didn't fit the cruel, narrow standards of the East Coast elite her family name had thrust her into. As a black woman from an old money family, she was a striking presence, not for her wealth, but for her quiet elegance and the way she looked at people, as if everyone had a story worth hearing. Yet behind her back, the same people who praised her charitable donations called her the Fat Rhodes Girl. Her husband, Andrew Cole, was one of them. That morning, the Greenwich, Connecticut mansion smelled of fresh jasmine and gourmet coffee. It was Andrew's birthday. The private chef had prepared a special brunch, and Vanessa had personally ordered fresh flowers to adorn the living room. She had chosen a high-end Rolex watch she knew he craved, not for the time it told, but for the designer name that would sparkle on his wrist in campaign photos. Andrew, 7 years her junior, was an aspiring politician, charismatic in public and cold in private. His gaze was that of a hunter, always calculating his next move. They had been married for a decade. No children, no scandals, no love. Sometimes, Vanessa wondered if love had ever existed at all, or if she had simply imagined it like dreaming of a beachfront house that never gets built. At 10:16 that morning, she came down the grand staircase, holding an envelope. A certificate for a $100,000 donation, made in Andrew's name to the National Children's Foundation. She thought it would make him smile. He loved looking generous. Even more, he loved seeing his image strengthened on social media. The dining room was empty, but she heard voices in the adjacent parlor. She paused, out of sheer habit, and stood motionless behind the slightly ajar door. And then she heard it. "That fat cow disgusts me, Mom," Andrew said, laughing. "I only care about her money." "What, did you think I actually enjoy sleeping with her?" Vanessa stopped breathing. Margaret Cole, her mother-in-law, showed no surprise. Her voice responded as if confirming something obvious. "At least pretend, Andrew. Do it until you inherit everything that's hers. After that, you know what to do. That woman's days in your life are numbered. Do you really want to be tied to a body that looks like an inflated bag, a piñata stuffed with regrets?" They laughed with the lightness of people who feel no shame about their cruelty. Vanessa swallowed hard. The envelope slipped from her hand without a sound. Her face didn't change, but her legs trembled slightly, as if the world had suddenly sped up beneath her. She held firm. She slowly backed away, climbed the stairs without her heels making a sound, and quietly closed the door to her bedroom as if nothing had happened. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't confront them. That night, they ate dinner together. Vanessa offered a cheerful smile and gave him his gift. Andrew thanked her with a dry kiss on the cheek and feigned enthusiasm. Margaret commented that the wine was excellent and suggested Vanessa should try a friend's diet. Everyone laughed except Vanessa. She simply watched them both with a serenity that was less about calm and more about planning. Past midnight, Andrew was sound asleep in the main suite, while Vanessa walked barefoot through the house. She looked at every corner, the artwork she had chosen, the furniture she had imported from Italy, the grand piano she never learned to play. Every object was a silent witness to a life that had never truly been hers. It was a museum built to fit a mold that had been suffocating her for years. In the study, she pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote in a steady hand, "Thanks for showing your true colors." She signed it without a name. Then she opened her laptop. In less than an hour, she contacted a discreet real estate broker and a foreign buyer, and transferred the bulk of her fortune to a new account in Switzerland under a different identity. Having spent years managing her family's wealth, she knew exactly how to move money without leaving a trace. By 5 a.m., the mansion was behind her. No servants saw her leave. She carried only a backpack, a long coat, her passport, and a photograph of herself at 18, when she dreamed of traveling the world before the Rhodes name turned her into a trophy wife. 2 hours later, Andrew woke up. He called out for his wife. Confused by her absence, he checked the kitchen, the garden, the bathrooms. He found her only as a piece of paper on the pillow. "Thanks for showing your true colors." He crumpled the note, not understanding. He didn't even suspect she had heard the conversation. He figured it was a tantrum, a stupid impulse, emotional nonsense. He called her cell phone. It was off. He sent texts. No reply. He called his mother. "Where is Vanessa? Why are you asking me?" "She left. She just left a note. Thanks for showing your true colors." What the hell does that mean? Margaret felt a shiver run through her for the first time. That same day, Andrew discovered the house had been sold. The buyer had wired the money directly to the Swiss account. He had no access. Legally, everything belonged to Vanessa, even his suits. What Andrew didn't know was that the media was about to explode. The bank involved in the transfer had inadvertently leaked a statement to a finance reporter who had been investigating him for corruption. It was only a matter of days before the scandal hit national television. Meanwhile, Vanessa was sitting on a city bus heading to the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago, a place where nobody would recognize her. She looked out the window, her eyes calm, her mouth set in a straight line. She carried her old photo in the inside pocket of her coat like an amulet, and for the first time in years, she breathed without effort. She had no fixed plan or destination, only one purpose: to start over from a place where she was worth nothing, to discover how much she was truly worth. On the evening news, the anchor announced, "The wife of rising political figure Andrew Cole has disappeared. There are rumors she sold their mansion and emptied her accounts. Some say kidnapping, others say it's a marital scandal." Nobody knew for sure, but she did. She knew the real kidnapping had been her entire life. She knew that contempt, disguised as marriage, would no longer have a place in her existence. And she also knew that soon the world would meet a woman who had been called a lucky fat girl, but who was now determined to prove there is nothing more powerful than a woman, who no longer needs anyone else to lift herself up. Vanessa Rhodes hadn't escaped. She had awakened. The bus advanced slowly through dusty streets, the windows fogged with the damp morning air. Vanessa's backpack rested on her lap. Inside were no jewels, no designer clothes, no expensive perfumes, only documents, some cash, a notebook filled with phrases she wrote when her chest couldn't contain the tears, and that faded photograph of her youth, her standing by the ocean with her arms open as if the whole world belonged to her. Back then, she hadn't yet met Andrew. Back then, she hadn't yet become the elegant shadow of a fraudulent life. The bus stopped with a screech. The driver turned his head without interest and said in a rough voice, "South Shore, last stop." Vanessa stood up. No one looked at her. No one recognized the woman who just 2 days ago had graced the covers of fashion magazines and charity event spreads. In this world, she was invisible, and for the first time, it gave her a sense of relief. South Shore wasn't a poor neighborhood, it was a wounded one. The cracked facades seemed to tell stories of fierce winters, broken promises, and hopes that survived like weeds between the stones. Children played barefoot in puddles of dirty water. Women swept sidewalks while carrying babies on their hips. A man sold BBQ ribs from a food truck on the corner, an old radio spitting out timeless soulful R&B. Vanessa walked the streets, observing every detail with a mix of fear and fascination. A taped-up notice on a house gate caught her attention. Room for rent, shared bath, no questions asked. She knocked on the door. A woman in her 60s with weathered skin and small, distrustful eyes came out. "Looking for something?" she asked. "I saw the sign. I'm looking for a place to stay for a while. I can pay up front." The woman scanned her from head to toe. Something about her didn't fit. Too much poise, skin too well cared for in this environment. "Name?" Vanessa hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Nora Wells." "That's an odd name," the woman muttered. "Come in. The room's free, but I don't give refunds, and I don't like trouble. You won't have any." The room was small, with a twin bed, a fan that sounded like it was about to fall from the ceiling, and a window without a proper pane. The walls were stained with dampness. It smelled of confinement, but to her, it felt like a sanctuary. She paid for a month and settled in. That night, she didn't cry. She just lay on the hard mattress, closed her eyes, and let the silence do its work. The next day, she walked aimlessly through the neighborhood. She introduced herself as a woman ruined by financial fraud, someone who had lost everything. It wasn't a lie, though not for the reasons everyone imagined. They looked at her with pity, but also with a certain morbid curiosity. She was new, she was strange, she was another sad story in a place full of them. She arrived at a small community health center. The facade was peeling. Inside, there were a couple of rusty exam tables, broken plastic chairs, and a makeshift reception desk made of cardboard boxes. A woman was arguing with a young man about medicine they couldn't afford. "Ma'am, I already told you, we don't have that antibiotic, and if you get it outside, I can't guarantee it's authentic." The masculine voice belonged to a tall man with disheveled brown hair. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and dark circles under his eyes revealed sleepless nights. His tone was firm, yet warm. Vanessa watched him for a few seconds. He glanced at her fleetingly, then refocused on the patient. Tell your son to keep coming. Even if you don't have the money, we don't deny care here. We'll find the medicine somehow. When they finished, Vanessa approached him. Are you the doctor? I'm Dr. Daniel Hayes. Do you need medical attention? No, I came to volunteer. I have experience in organization management. Maybe I can help with inventory, coordinating donations, things like that. Dr. Hayes observed her in silence. There was something about the way she spoke that contained certainty, confidence, something that didn't match her story of having lost everything. He didn't confront her. He extended his hand. Welcome, Nora. This place needs more hands than questions. And so it began. In the following days, Nora learned to fold stained sheets, organize boxes of expired supplies, and receive minimal donations that arrived like small miracles. No one asked about her past. All that mattered was what she did in the present. It was in that same clinic that she met Emma. The girl was 8 years old, with dull hair and big dark eyes that looked as if they knew too much. She sat on the exam table, her head resting on the shoulder of a sweet-faced elder. Mrs. Carter, she hasn't wanted to eat for 3 days, the woman said. She has a fever at night, and her skin's getting paler. Daniel examined her, ordered tests, then stepped out into the hall and leaned against the wall. His face was tense. What is it? Nora asked. I suspect leukemia, but we need the labs, and that costs money. Nora looked through the window. Emma was playing with a doll missing an arm, murmuring words softly as if telling it secrets. Mrs. Carter approached Nora when Daniel left. You're not from around here. Pardon me, but your hands are clean. Your nails are neat. Your back is straight. Life here tends to hunch us over. Nora didn't reply. Don't worry. I had my secrets when I was young, too. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying that when a woman is hiding something, she has to choose carefully who she lets look at her. Because some eyes are only looking for flesh, and others are looking for a soul. Daniel is the second kind. Nora nodded, a lump in her throat. 2 weeks passed. She became part of the place, not for what she knew, but for what she offered: time, listening, commitment. She took care of cleaning, assisting, carrying boxes. At night, she wrote in her notebook one sentence over and over again. I never had time for the poor until I became one of them. One morning, while organizing files in the small office, the phone rang. Daniel answered with a routine tone, but his face changed when he heard the name. Cole, are you sure? And the file still exists. Nora dropped a box. He looked at her, didn't say anything, but noticed her trembling. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just got a little dizzy. Daniel returned to the call, ending it in silence. He didn't explain anything. He just went out to the back patio for a cigarette. Nora felt her heart pounding as if it wanted to escape her chest. Cole. That name was a gunshot in her memory. The echo of everything she wanted to bury. Later, she saw him sitting alone. She approached. Can I ask what that call was about? He hesitated. It's about a patient from the past. A case I thought was closed. They mentioned a name, one I haven't heard in years. Cole. Nora felt a chill. Do you know him? She lied as she had so many times to survive. Daniel didn't insist, but his eyes looked at her like someone beginning to assemble the pieces of a puzzle. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on her mattress, the backpack open, the photograph in her hand, the notebook full of phrases that weighed heavier and heavier. She was no longer Vanessa, but Nora Wells was also beginning to crack. In this game of names, lies, and hidden truths, she didn't know how much longer she could sustain the new life she was just beginning to build. There are wounds that scar, and others that won't let you breathe. And the name Cole was one of the latter. Nora looked at herself in the cracked mirror of the shared bathroom as she washed her face. The water was murky and cold, and the dirty tiles reflected an image she didn't fully recognize yet. Nora Wells, she whispered to her reflection. The name had become a kind of armor. She wore it with increasing ease, though a part of her still trembled inside. Weeks passed slowly, but something within her began to change. The humble routine, the real human connection, the absence of appearances at all started to mold her heart, the way fire molds metal. She no longer thought constantly about Andrew. She no longer replayed that hateful phrase, like a dagger embedded in her memory. Now she thought about other things: May's laughter, the wariness in Daniel's eyes, Mrs. Carter's intuitive gaze, and an idea that began to take shape. A plan to build something new from the ruins, not for herself, but for other women who had also been used, manipulated, and silenced. Emma had become her center of gravity. The girl clung to her with absolute trust, as if she had been waiting for her all her life. They played with rag dolls, invented absurd stories, and shared silences that said more than 1,000 words. Nora didn't need to be a biological mother to feel that bond. Deep down, she knew this was the love life had denied her. "Have you ever felt invisible, too?" Emma asked her one morning, as they drew on the floor with colored chalk. "Yes, many times," Nora replied without thinking too much. "Then we're the same," the girl said, "because when people are scared, they look away, and then you don't exist anymore." Nora felt a lump in her throat. She wondered how many times she herself had looked away, confined to her bubble of luxury and appearances. How many times she had pretended not to see the misery from her armored car. That guilt became a silent companion. One hot afternoon, the neighborhood filled with music, a community fair had been organized to raise funds for the clinic. Daniel proposed it as an excuse for everyone to distract themselves. But it was Nora who took charge. She convinced the neighborhood women to make sweets, crafts, and knitted clothes. She coordinated the spaces, the timing, the permits. In just a few days, she became a central figure. "I don't know who you were before, Nora," Mrs. Carter told her while they kneaded bread together, "but who you are now is good for this place." Nora smiled faintly. She had stopped correcting people when they called her by her new name. It wasn't just to disguise it, was becoming her truth. In the midst of this small rebirth, an unexpected memory surfaced. Daniel was talking to a nurse about an old file. They mentioned something that made Nora's stomach turn. "Margaret Cole. I was her private physician," Daniel said, unaware Nora was listening behind a curtain. "I was fired years ago when I refused to cover up illegal prescriptions they were giving to addicted patients. Her son, that politician Andrew, threatened to destroy my career if I spoke up." Nora felt a pang. Her story and Daniel's had been connected long before they met. The same names, the same corruption. The circle was closing without them knowing it. Or perhaps fate was crueler than she imagined. That night, as the fair ended, Nora climbed onto the roof of the building where she lived. She looked at the starry sky, and for the first time since she had fled, she allowed the tears to flow. It wasn't sadness. It was a bitter mix of gratitude and pain. She was alive. She was free. But there were still shadows she couldn't erase. Miles away, Andrew Cole threw his glass of scotch against the office wall. The crystal shattered, and no one dared to look up. His political campaign was collapsing. Some donors were abandoning him. The media was beginning to suspect. Reporters were on the trail of the suspicious sale of the Greenwich mansion. Vanessa's disappearance had become a full-blown scandal. "Find her," he ordered the private investigator he had hired. "I don't care how. I need her back before this sinks me." The man, an ex-military type named Rick Lawson, nodded without emotion. He already had some leads: bank movements, phone connections, blurry security camera images. It was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Nora visited an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the neighborhood. No one watched her. No one suspected she had secretly bought the place using a new identity. Her plan was clear: to transform it into a foundation for women who were victims of abuse. A real shelter with counselors, food, housing, and legal aid. A place where others like her could start over without having to lie about their names. She wrote everything down in her thick-leaved notebook: needs, suppliers, funding, ideas. Daniel helped her without asking too many questions. He no longer looked at her with suspicion, but with something closer to admiration, although an unmistakable melancholy still beat in his eyes. "I lost my wife to a misdiagnosed pneumonia," he confessed one night. "Private care killed her. Expensive hospitals make mistakes too, they just cover them up better." Nora listened without speaking. She knew that, in a way, he too had been broken by a rotten system. At the fair, Emma was selling handmade string bracelets. Her smile was brighter than any street lamp. She ran between the stalls with uncontainable energy. Mrs. Carter watched her with tired but happy eyes. Everything seemed to be flowing until the unexpected happened. Emma suddenly collapsed. Her body trembled briefly before going still. A pool of blood emerged from her nose. The silence was immediate. Daniel ran to her, lifted her in his arms, and shouted orders. Nora followed, barely feeling her legs. At the clinic, they connected an IV, took samples, and applied oxygen. The diagnosis arrived like a bucket of ice water. "The leukemia has progressed," Daniel said, his voice broken, "and we don't have what we need to treat her here." Nora clenched her fists. There was no way she would stand by. Not now. Not with this girl who had given her back her soul. That night, while Emma slept with a fever, Nora opened her backpack and checked her last reserve: a single piece of jewelry she had hidden with extreme care. The only one she hadn't sold or left behind. It was her grandmother's ring with a sapphire worth more than the entire neighborhood. She clasped it in her fist and walked into the city. The next morning, she returned with a sealed envelope and a check sufficient to begin the treatment. No one asked how she got it. No one had the right. But Daniel looked at her with new eyes. They weren't eyes of suspicion, they were eyes of certainty. "You didn't come here to hide," he told her softly. "You came here to rebuild yourself. And you know what? You're doing it, even if you're still breathing through lies." Nora looked down for the first time. She wanted to tell him the truth, tell him her real name, her story, everything, but she didn't. "Not yet, not yet." Emma, from her bed, smiled at her with dry lips. "Don't leave me." "Never," Nora replied, taking her hand. The clock kept ticking. Andrew kept searching. But Nora was no longer the woman who stayed quiet when she heard she disgusted him. Now she was a woman who fought, even if fear still breathed behind every smile, because lies, when sustained for too long, begin to take on a life of their own, and hers were already breathing. Nora woke before sunrise, as she had almost every day since adopting the name Nora Wells. The fan whirred with a constant noise, and the damp walls of her room seemed grayer than ever. She squeezed her eyelids shut before opening her eyes completely. She wanted to delay the moment of remembering who she was, of carrying again the weight that weighed like a tombstone on her chest. Emma was still hospitalized, connected to medication that barely controlled the advance of her leukemia. Every minute was a struggle, every smile from the girl a shield against despair. And despite having secured the initial funds by selling that hidden jewel, Nora knew it wouldn't be enough. The treatment would be long, brutal, and costly, not just in money but in soul. At the clinic, Daniel watched her more closely. Her movements, her silences, her meticulous way of avoiding talking about herself, it all intrigued him. It wasn't only admiration he felt for her anymore. There was something more unsettling, an intuition, as if he were walking through a map he already knew, but with all the names erased. He was beginning to suspect that the story she told was a shortened, polished version of something much deeper. Something inside him said there was more, much more, beneath that sad calm. That morning, while reviewing the medicine inventory in the small pharmacy room, Daniel dropped a comment that wasn't accidental. "Nora, did you ever live abroad? You have an accent, neutral, educated. It's not common here." She stopped, swallowed, and thought fast. "I studied for a few years in Europe, then worked in DC for a while. That's why I sometimes have that odd tone." Daniel nodded without saying anything, but the doubt in his eyes deepened. Hours later, Nora visited the abandoned warehouse again, the one she was slowly transforming into the future Nora Wells Foundation. She sat in the dust on a broken box and pulled out her notebook. She wrote a single phrase: "Fear is a cage with open doors." She closed the notebook and took a deep breath. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there was Mrs. Carter, holding a bag of bread and wearing that sharp, knowing look that seemed to pierce through the layers of one's soul. "I looked for you at the clinic. Emma asked about you," she said without preamble. Nora got up, dusting her hands. "I just came to jot down a few things. I need to get this place running before everything collapses." The older woman placed the bread on a box and studied her quietly. "You're not running from fraud or economic ruin. I knew that from the first day, not because of what you say, but because of what you keep silent. You don't run from love, dear. You only run from fear. And you, who do you fear?" The question floated in the air like heavy smoke. Nora wanted to answer, but she didn't have enough words for everything she carried inside. Finally, she whispered, "Myself." Mrs. Carter nodded. She didn't need more. She left the bag of bread, gently touched Nora's shoulder, and left without saying goodbye. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Andrew Cole stared at his computer with controlled fury. Before him was a photo taken by a volunteer at a charity fair in South Shore. In the image, a group of women were gathered around a food stall, smiling. In the corner, almost blurred but unmistakable, was her Vanessa. His heart pounded violently. He stood up, threw his chair backward, and shouted, "Get the car ready. We're going to South Shore." 3 hours later, his black SUV, with tinted windows, slid through the dusty streets of the neighborhood, clashing with everything around it. People looked at him with distrust. Some stepped aside, others pretended not to see. Nora was returning from buying gauze for the clinic when she saw the car parked in front of the medical center entrance. She stopped cold. Her stomach dropped. Her chest tightened. She would recognize that vehicle even in her sleep. She didn't think, she didn't analyze. She simply spun on her heels and began walking in the opposite direction, not running, but with the precise rhythm of someone fleeing without wanting to seem like they were fleeing. She ducked into an alley, then another, climbed a small incline, and hid behind a broken wall until the car started and disappeared from her sight. He hadn't seen her. Andrew hadn't found her, but he was close to close. That night, she couldn't sleep. Fear had returned like an old illness. It crawled back into her bones, whispering all the things she had tried to forget. She wondered how much longer she could sustain this fragile peace before everything crumbled. At the clinic, Emma waited for her with bright eyes. She held out a bracelet made of red threads. "It's so you won't leave," the girl said. "Now you're tied to me." Nora knelt by the bed, stroked her forehead, and smiled through trembling lips. "I'm tied to you, even if you don't put it on me." "Are you sad?" Emma asked softly. "A little. Why?" "You saved my life," the girl whispered. Nora bit back her tears. "Because I don't know how to save my own." Daniel, listening from the doorway, felt something inside him break. He couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. This woman wasn't just anyone. She had scars that didn't match her invented story. That night, when everyone was asleep, Daniel entered the clinic's small office and turned on his laptop. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for until he did. He typed the name that had been haunting him since he met Nora Wells, Vanessa Rhodes. The browser filled with results, photos from social events, magazine covers, news of her disappearance, articles about the mysterious mansion sale, political scandals, and an image that froze him. The same smile, the same eyes, the same woman who now folded sheets and cleaned floors at his side. Nora Wells didn't exist. She was a mask, but everything she had done was real: the help, the tenderness, the devotion. This woman, with a past made of broken glass, had saved lives. She had resurrected her own, and now he knew who she really was: Vanessa Rhodes, the disappeared wife of the man who had humiliated and destroyed him years before. The circle had closed. Daniel leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and exhaled deeply. He could no longer pretend he didn't know. And now, he had to decide what to do with that truth, because the price of knowing was the power to look away, and he wasn't going to look away again. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The image of Vanessa Rhodes on his screen was burned into his mind. Nora Wells didn't exist, but everything she had built did. The laughter of the children, the hope in Mrs. Carter's eyes, Emma's trust. He had watched her heal the wounds of others while carrying her own in silence, and now he knew the truth. If he confronted her, nothing would ever be the same, but silence would also be a betrayal of the very truth he stood for. He found her sitting on the clinic's threshold at dawn, the notebook in her hands. She wasn't writing, she was just holding it, as if it anchored her to life. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She looked up, her gaze showed no surprise. Deep down, she had already known that he knew. "Yes," she said slowly, closing the notebook. "It's time." They walked together to the warehouse, the same empty space that was slowly filling with meaning, boxers, and purpose. Daniel faced her with the controlled expression of a man about to throw a stone into still water, knowing he couldn't stop the ripples it would create. "Why did you lie?" he asked. Vanessa leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, her voice calm but low. "Because if I told the truth, they would hunt me down. He would find me. They would use me again. And I no longer had the strength to be someone's trophy, someone's shadow in a glass case." "Vanessa Rhodes," he murmured, as if saying her real name hurt his mouth. "Wife of Andrew Cole, heiress to one of the country's oldest fortunes, and now, a ghost everyone's searching for." She nodded slowly. "They can keep looking. I stopped belonging to that world the moment I stopped needing its approval." Daniel lowered his head, overwhelmed by the weight of everything he now knew. She stepped closer. "I didn't lie to play games. I didn't do it to manipulate anyone. I just wanted a life that didn't hurt." "And did you find it?" he asked softly. Vanessa smiled sadly. "Sometimes, when Emma laughs, when you talk to me without expecting anything, when I clean wounds without cameras around." He looked at her, searching for the right words but finding none. "Finally," he said, "you're not a coward. You were brave to leave. But now you have to be brave enough to come back." She frowned slightly. "Come back to what?" "To your name," Daniel replied. "To face them, to take back what's yours. Because if you don't, they will, and they'll twist the story again, make you the villain, just like they always have." Vanessa looked at him for a long time. Something cracked inside her, something fragile but necessary. Meanwhile, In Washington, D.C., the media erupted with headlines. An anonymous report had leaked from the prosecutor's office, revealing documents, audio, and financial movements linking Andrew Cole and his mother, Margaret Cole, 2 cases of money laundering, misuse of public funds, and bribery of judges. Andrew screamed furiously at his lawyers over the phone, throwing accusations left and right. Margaret didn't leave her room, not out of shame but out of fear. That morning, an envelope had arrived at her door with no return address. Inside was a copy of an altered birth certificate and a letter that simply read, "The truth can't be erased." Margaret felt her hands tremble for the first time in years. The past she had buried was clawing its way back. In a moment of desperation, she did something she hadn't done in decades. She called Daniel Hayes. He hesitated, but eventually agreed to meet her at a discreet hotel far from the cameras. When he arrived, he barely recognized her. Margaret looked older, thinner, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, only dark circles and trembling hands. "I'm not here to justify myself," she began, her voice brittle. "I know what I've done, but you need to know something, Andrew. Andrew is not my son." Daniel blinked, unsure he had heard her correctly. "What are you saying? My husband and I could never have children. I was assaulted by a man when I was 18. I hid it. I pretended to be the legitimate mother. I raised that child as if I didn't remember how he came into the world." Daniel felt the air grow heavy. "And you never told him?" "Never," she whispered. "Until now, because he's becoming that man, the same cruelty, the same hunger for control, and I can't let it happen again." There was a long silence. Then Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside were photographs, documents, and a sealed envelope. "Emma, that little girl. What is her mother's name?" "She died giving birth," Daniel said cautiously. "She's not listed in any official records," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "Look closely. That girl could be her granddaughter. There are coincidences, dates, details. I don't have certainty, but there are connections. You'll understand when you read." Daniel left that hotel feeling as if he carried a ghost on his shoulders. He didn't know how to connect the pieces yet, but something inside him told him the truth was closer than he imagined. That night, Vanessa was waiting for him at the warehouse. She had been cleaning, organizing, trying to distract herself, but the moment she saw his face, she knew he brought more than just bad news. "What happened?" she asked. He told her everything about Margaret, about Andrew, about the possibility that Emma was connected to them in ways none of them could have foreseen. Vanessa remained silent, staring out the cracked window. "I have something to tell you too," she said quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. "What is it?" "I'm sick," she said simply. "Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. I was diagnosed a year ago. That's why I left too. I didn't want to die surrounded by people who only cried for my inheritance." Daniel's throat tightened. He couldn't find words. "I have a few years left, maybe months if I'm lucky," Vanessa continued. "But I want that time to mean something." "It will," he said at last, his eyes wet. "We're going to build that foundation. We'll finish it together. And when you're gone, it'll still stand. It'll still carry your name." She looked at him and smiled for the first time, without fear. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was something deeper. The silent union of 2 people who had lost almost everything yet still dared to hope. When she returned to her small room that night, she found an envelope with her name written in cursive. She opened it. It was a letter, and she recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from her mother, Helen Rhodes. "Vanessa, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I don't know how much damage I did to you. I only know there were years when I hated you because you were everything I could never be, because your father loved you more than me, because you shone effortlessly, and I was just a gray woman trapped in a marble house. Forgive me for being so harsh, for not protecting you, for not telling you that you deserved better than a husband who only wanted you for your name. I knew it from the first day, but I stayed silent as always. This letter is not an excuse. It's a confession and a plea. Don't let my bitterness live in you. Be free, be strong, and when you can't go on anymore, don't hide it. Allow yourself to be cared for, loved, supported, because even if you don't say it, you also deserve to be saved." Vanessa folded the letter and pressed it to her heart. The tears came slowly, then violently, the kind that shake the soul, that wash away years of silence. The foundation wasn't finished yet. Andrew was still searching for her. The diagnosis still loomed like a shadow inside her body. But that night, for the first time in her life, she slept without fear. Because truth hurts, yes, but it also frees, and she no longer had room for lies. The work on the old warehouse finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The hands of the neighborhood united as if the project had always belonged to them. Men who could barely read mixed cement with a surgeon's precision. Women who carried years of pain painted the walls as if they were washing their own wounds. Every brick, every tile, held a story. Stories that until then no one had wanted to hear. When the last coat of white paint dried, Vanessa stood before the building's entrance. The sign read in simple blue letters, the Nora Wells Foundation. It was the name that had given her refuge, now transformed into a symbol of rebirth for others. The opening ceremony was simple. No journalists, no cameras, no empty speeches. Only those who mattered were there. Emma, her hair thin from chemotherapy, carrying the scissors to cut the ribbon. Daniel Hayes, his eyes misted with pride and grief. Mrs. Carter, standing quietly beside a group of women from the neighborhood who had helped make it possible. Vanessa took a deep breath, her lungs trembling slightly, as if even breathing was now an act of resistance. She had completed the legal paperwork weeks earlier. All her remaining assets, accounts, investments, and shares had been transferred to the foundation's name. Not a single jewel, not one property, remained under her own. Everything that had once been a symbol of oppression was now a tool of salvation. As she walked through the new corridors, the white walls, the murals painted by children, the consultation rooms waiting for patients, she felt something deep and calm within her. This place wasn't just a structure, it was her redemption. Days later, in the shadow of a hallway corner, Margaret Cole appeared. No one had seen her arrive. She was dressed simply, without makeup or rings. Her eyes were swollen, and her body stooped as if she had been carrying a guilt that was finally too heavy to bear. Emma was asleep when Margaret entered her room. She sat by the bed and clumsily stroked the girl's hand. She murmured words that seemed directed more at herself than at the child. Then she left silently. But Vanessa was waiting outside. "I knew you would come," she said softly. Margaret looked down. "I didn't come to justify myself," she murmured. "I came to ask for your forgiveness, not for Andrew. He chose his path already. I came to ask forgiveness for myself, for being an accomplice, for staying silent." Vanessa studied her in silence for several seconds. "And you expect me to forgive you?" "No," Margaret replied, her voice breaking. "Just to listen, then speak," Vanessa said. "I watched you fade away for years," Margaret whispered. "You became something so perfect. It was impossible to see you. You were invisible, Vanessa. Invisible just as I was my whole life. I was used, manipulated, forced to keep quiet, and you were my mirror. That's why I hated you, because you reminded me of everything I didn't dare to be." Vanessa stepped closer, not to embrace her, but to look her straight in the eyes. "I hear you," she said quietly, "but I don't forgive you for what you did to me. I forgive you for what you did to yourself." Margaret released the tears she had held back for decades. She nodded faintly, then turned and walked away, her figure small and trembling against the bright walls. On television, Andrew Cole was news again, no longer as a politician, but as a suspect. His face appeared among headlines of corruption, bribery, and fraud. His party expelled him. His supporters vanished. His face no longer sold smiles, it sold scandal. And then, as a last desperate act, he appeared in front of the foundation. Vanessa watched him from the second floor. She felt neither fear nor anger, only a cold, detached compassion, like someone watching a man already condemned. He waited for her in the courtyard, holding a briefcase and looking older than the years that had passed. "I didn't come to fight," he said as soon as he saw her. "I came to make a deal." "There are no deals with you," Vanessa replied calmly. "I have proof," he insisted. "Documents. I could ruin you with a lie. I could say you stole, that you faked your disappearance to take everything." She smiled faintly. "I already did. I took everything but not what you think. I took back the dignity you lost years ago." She stepped closer, her gaze unshakable. "Do you really think this place is worth less than what you had?" Andrew's voice cracked. "No, I think this place is the only thing that's worth anything. Because you always were." For a second, the silence between them was heavy and human. Then Vanessa said softly, "Tell your mother I heard her, and tell her the girl doesn't need to know who her grandfather was. She already has enough love. She doesn't need yours." Before he could reply, Vanessa reached into her purse and handed him an envelope. "This is the last thing you'll ever have from me." He walked away without opening it. Later, In his empty apartment, he unfolded the letter. Power without love is hollow. Money without soul is death. You killed me many times while I was alive, but I resurrected, and you are still buried in your own ego. We are no longer enemies. We are nothing. Learn to be alone. Maybe then you'll start to find yourself. That night, Daniel and Vanessa shared a night together. It wasn't a night of passion. It was a night of truth. They slept in the same bed, listening to each other breathe, like two castaways holding on to one another in the middle of a vast ocean. Are you scared? He asked. I have peace, she said. It's not the absence of fear, but it's enough. I love you, he whispered. She didn't respond with words. She took his hand and placed it on her chest. When morning came, Daniel went to get coffee. When he returned, she was still in bed, her face serene, a faint smile frozen on her lips. He knew before touching her. She was gone. He didn't scream. He didn't cry right away. He simply sat beside her, held her hand, and stayed there until the sun rose completely. On the table were envelopes with handwritten names, one for Daniel, one for Emma, one for Mrs. Carter, one for Margaret. Daniel's note read, Don't cry for what wasn't, be thankful for what was. I leave the life I wanted for myself in your hands. Never let anyone doubt your light, because you made me shine even in the darkness. Emma's letter was short. You taught me that a smile can heal more than medicine. Promise me you'll write your story. The world needs to know a little girl who defeated fear. The Nora Wells Foundation continued to stand. It grew, it healed, it embraced, and on one of its main walls, a mural of Vanessa's smiling face reminded everyone that some women, though they may die, never truly leave, because what changes the world isn't money, it's the truth and the love built from it. There was no funeral in a marble cemetery. No political eulogies, no empty speeches. Her body was cremated, as she requested, and her ashes were scattered in the foundation's garden, beneath a young almond tree that Emma promised to water every morning. The news of her death spread quickly through the neighborhood. Women wept at the gate, children went silent. Daniel moved like a ghost, but he didn't stop. There was work to do, and a promise to keep. Weeks later, Emma found a manuscript in Vanessa's desk drawer, bound neatly in her steady handwriting. The title read, He Said I Disgusted Him. The first line, This is not the story of a woman abandoned, but of a woman who learned to abandon herself for others, until one day, she woke up. Daniel read it in one night. When he finished, he knew what he had to do. Months later, the book was published by an independent press. It went viral. Women bought it in silence, shared it in whispers, and cried over it in classrooms. It wasn't just Vanessa's story, it was theirs. Every cent of the proceeds funded new branches of the Nora Wells Foundation. Emma named the second one the House of the Reborn. She painted its wall with the words from Vanessa's letter, Promise me you'll write your story, and she did. Emma wrote her own book, a children's story about a little girl who defeated the monster of gray days with a red bracelet and a smile. She spoke of Vanessa as if she were still alive, and in her heart, she was. Daniel continued as the foundation's director. On nights when the silence felt unbearable, he would touch the small locket around his neck. Inside, a lock of Vanessa's hair, and a note that read, When you doubt yourself, touch this. Here is the part of me that will never leave. Margaret Cole changed, too. She sold everything, donated it all to the foundation, and disappeared from public life. Some said she moved abroad, others said she entered a convent. No one really knew. Andrew, for his part, sank into oblivion, forgotten, defeated, a man consumed by the ruins of his own making. A year later, at a ceremony in the foundation's garden, women from all over the country gathered to celebrate the anniversary of the woman who had changed their lives. One by one, they spoke into the microphone, voices trembling but firm. I was invisible until I read her story, said one woman. Vanessa didn't die. She woke up in me, in all of us. Daniel closed his eyes and smiled. Beside him, Emma squeezed his hand. Do you think she sees us from up there? The girl asked. He looked toward the almond tree swaying in the wind and whispered, I have no doubt. They used to call her the lucky fat woman, a woman born into privilege, married into power, and yet unseen in every room she ever walked into. But the truth was, Vanessa Rhodes had never been lucky. She had been patient. She had been kind. She had been silent, until silence became too heavy to carry. When her husband said, That woman disgusts me, she didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply disappeared. And from that disappearance, 1,000 women were found. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's the loudest kind of freedom. In the end, Vanessa didn't die rich, but she died free. And freedom, the kind that comes from truth, is a kind of wealth no one can steal. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember her story. Remember Nora Wells, the woman who rebuilt herself from the ruins of a lie and turned her pain into a place where others could heal. Because some women don't need revenge. They just need to wake up and live so fully, the world never dares to silence them again.